What's going on, everyone? The main purpose of today's video is going to be to talk about the Sprint, but wanted to show you guys some footage I took of one of the coolest Harley Davidson dealerships in my area and maybe in the state of Wisconsin. This is Doc's Harley Davidson in Shawano County. I went out there and looked around. They do a really good job of making this place really an attraction and not just a Harley Davidson dealership. They've got all kinds of vintage motorcycles, this one here on the lift being from 1911, I believe, and tons of other attractions throughout the dealership here. There's a restaurant, there's animals, which we'll look more at later here. They really do a really good job of making it kind of a family-friendly type of atmosphere and something that anybody can come visit, whether you're shopping for a motorcycle or not, which I think is awesome, and it's something more dealerships should think about doing here. So I wanted to walk through a couple of the showrooms and in one of their museums here. This was kind of a cool vintage motor wall, if you will, they had in their main showroom with all the new motorcycles for sale. Another very early 1913 model 1-speed transmission, which I thought was pretty cool. I'm thinking maybe this blue bike next to it actually could be a Sprint. Looks like a single cylinder, but this bike was underwater for some time, it looks like, and back in their service center, a couple more vintage motorcycles. I think the Dyna's just there for service, but some of these were from the early 1920s, which were really cool to look at as well. And as we'll see in just a second here, they actually had a motorcycle that was all rigged up with a wicker basket sidecar. There it is, which I thought was insane. I don't know if I would personally want to sit in that, but it was cool to see nonetheless. And yeah, like I said, just really enjoyed walking around kind of the main area there. And then we got into kind of this back room, which is more of a museum slash showroom area with tons of different vintage motorcycles, all sorts of makes and models, and a lot of different vintage muscle cars and all the neon signs and garage signs, which I thought was just really awesome and right up my alley. This bike had 4 or 5 motors in it, and they actually have another one in the saloon where you can get some food with even more motors in it. I think it's like 8, and they rode that thing to Sturgis, so pretty incredible. But yeah, like I said, tons of cool things to see if you're ever going through the area, whether you want to buy a motorcycle or not, or even whether or not you're into motorcycles. It's just cool to stop in and check out. And like I said, yeah, there was animals there, which I've seen before, but never had realized that there was a full tank full of alligators there, so that was pretty incredible to see. Also, had never previously seen this snake and all those snake skins. I don't know if those are for sale or just decoration, but walked into the back room here then, and again, stumbled upon many more animals, which I had never seen before. Right about here, I paused because I realized this parrot's cage is wide open, and so I was a little freaked out. He might fly out and try getting me or something. But turtles, snakes, birds, all sorts of critters in here. My friend Meaty the snake, I couldn't find him in his cage, so I was quickly checking the floor to make sure he wasn't at my feet here. Some parrots in this big enclosure, but yeah, like I said, tons to see, tons to check out, a lot of fun. So figured I'd share this footage that I took from my visit to Doc's Harley Davidson. But that's it on this for now. Maybe I'll do another video with a more thorough walkthrough of Doc's, but we gotta jump into the topic for today, which is the Sprint. Alright, it is a beautiful 75 and sunny day here in Wisconsin, and I want to talk about the Sprint. Now, if you watched my video on the Sportster, I mentioned the Sprint a little bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about that bike and kind of what I hope it is, what I hope it isn't. My hopes for the bike, you know, changing it up, doing this one from the motorcycle, not in the garage. So, number one, I think it's awesome that they're coming out with that bike, and I think that that's probably how most people feel, right? Something that's inviting for beginners and is going to get people on the brand, right? One thing we know about Harley riders is that they're pretty loyal to the brand. Once they're on a Harley, they typically don't deviate and go ride something else. And so I think from that standpoint alone, a beginner bike is excellent. And let's face it, they need something that, you know, they can offer for their rider course, and then when people complete it, they can go in the dealership and buy the exact bike they just took the course on. They get comfortable with the bike, they know they like it. I mean, it just makes sense. So I think that's a huge win. And also, it's a good stepping stone for people, and it's going to create repeat sales for Harley, because, you know, if somebody buys a Sprint a year or 2 or 3 later, whatever it is, they want to get something bigger, they get a Sportster, and then a couple of years later they get a Softail or whatever it is. So you're creating an ecosystem that's driving multiple motorcycle sales. So for Harley, that's an excellent thing. And of course, during all of those years, the person is coming into the dealer, buying t-shirts, buying gear, buying oil. So it's a big economic driver for Harley, in my opinion. And that's all great. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people think about, that I'm really excited about for this bike, is, you know, the number of people that I know with a Harley that also have a second motorcycle is crazy. You know, they might have a bagger or something, and then they have something smaller to putz around town, run up the road for a coffee, ride it to work. Like, they don't want to have to ride the 900-pound bagger every time they're on a motorcycle. So, you know, for some people, they're looking for something smaller as a second bike. And like I said, Harley riders are pretty loyal to the brand, so I'm hoping that this bike, you know, aside from being good for beginners, is something that's appealing to people who already have a Harley to buy as a second bike. I think that's like a big added benefit that people aren't really talking about with the Sprint. So I think that's cool, and it'd be at a price point where it makes sense for people to maybe do that. So we'll see. Maybe people will start buying it as a second bike too. But in terms of the bike itself, you know, I'm honestly not really too worried about, like, engine size or whatever. I don't really care. I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot. I'm far more concerned with the stylistic side of the bike. I know they make, I think it's called the X440, and I think that's the one that's kind of sold overseas in other markets, where that kind of bike is maybe a little bit more appealing to those people, those demographics of people, and the type of riding that they do. I'm really hoping that the Sprint is not that bike, just rebranded, and that might be a perfectly good bike. There might not be anything wrong with it, right? And so, you know, I'm not trying to rip on that bike and say it's bad, but I just think that bike lacks in some of the stylistic points for a Harley Davidson. That bike doesn't invoke any sort of feeling when you look at it, right? And people who have Harleys and like Harleys, one of the, I think the biggest parts about Harleys is the feeling they invoke when they're sitting still, right? I don't think people can articulate that always, but you know, a beautiful American machine, right? And so if you get something that looks like the X440, which honestly I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Sprint is just the X440 branded, but I think they're missing a very key piece of the puzzle there. If that's what they bring out, I just don't feel like that bike, like I said, invokes enough
feeling when you look at it. It doesn't make you go, man, I really want to hop on that bike, because that thing is just, it's something special. So I hope it's something a little bit closer to the Royal Enfield, something like a little more of a classical look. And look at like how much Royal Enfield has exploded over the last 5-10 years. I haven't been motorcycling that long, but even I've noticed just a huge increase of Royal Enfields and other bikes from other manufacturers that look very similar, that carry that same type of look and appeal to it. Like, there's Triumphs I can think of. Harley needs to make the Sprint something like that, with a little bit more of an American twist, right? A little bit more of their stylistic points. I don't know. Overall, I was thinking about this, and I think the best way I can summarize it is that the Sprint needs to be basically a smaller Sportster, right? Not a smaller Nightster. I think if it just comes out and it's a smaller Nightster, that's completely off mark of what I think the majority of people potentially interested in that bike would be looking for. I don't know. I could be wrong, and I'm very like pro Harley look, and very into that styling, American cruiser motorcycle styling. So maybe people are gonna say, hey, I'm a beginner, and to be honest, I don't really care about some of that stuff. I just want a good bike that's well built and serves my needs as a beginner. And maybe the X440 will do that. But I still feel like, in my opinion, it's going to be critical that it's styled like a Harley Davidson, right? It's not going to have a V-twin, and I think that's okay. You can still make it, you could still make it Harley Davidson, the Harley Davidson characteristics. And I think doing it any other way would be a tragedy. And would probably set that bike up for failure. People don't buy Harley Davidsons because they're, like a good beginner bike. It's not why people buy the Sportster or whatever. Or maybe they're not even the best at a lot of things, but they buy it for what it is, for the ride it gives you, for the feeling it gives you, for the looks, right? So, Harleys are flawed motorcycles to begin with. And I think building something as unflawless as possible and without the soul of a Harley Davidson would be the wrong way to bring out the Sprint. So, I'll probably make another video about, I think Harley needs to be thinking about, hey, how can we capitalize a little bit more on selling multiple bikes to the same person? And I've mentioned in my Sportster video, I like thinking and talking about, the product strategy side of businesses, and Harley's no different. So, I think I'll talk about that maybe in a different video. But am I supposed to give that dude a 3 or a 2? I never know what to do with the trikes, man. Especially, like, I get guys on Spiders giving me the microwave. I'm like, bro, I don't know. Like, what am I supposed to do there? You give microwaves to dudes on trikes and Spiders. No disrespect to the trikes or the Spider riders or anything, but it just kind of throws me for a loop sometimes. I usually do it to, like, the Harley trikes, no doubt. But if you're on a Spider, bro, I don't know. Like, you're basically on a baby slingshot at that point. I'm just not sure if I can rock with it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a jerk, but half the reason why I got a damn motorcycle was to do the biker wave, and I'm not just trying to throw them out for free. Anyways, I kind of lost track of what I was trying to cover. I think I covered all the big things with the Sprint and my thoughts, what I hope it is, what I hope it isn't. So I'm interested to hear other people's thoughts too, like if you think more like me and think it needs to be styled a little bit more classical Harley Davidson-esque, or not, right? Maybe there's an argument and somebody's going to say, hey, like the X440 is going to be way more appealing to the new beginner entry-level rider, and maybe they're right, you know, I don't know. But let me know what you think down below. I think that's it for now. Peace out.